This is called Unboxed. I'm feeling pretty good about everything. It's 2 weeks before Christmas and almost everything is done. Shopping is all wrapped up. There's hors d'oeuvres in the freezer, in the fridge, and the decorating is done. I was really pleased about the decorating this year. I did a whole lot more than usual because I had some time before Christmas. The museum was closed, and I had some luck. I went to one of those sales selling the contents of storage lockers that have been abandoned. I felt a bit bad about it, actually. People putting stuff in storage lockers, and then for whatever reason, maybe they ran out of money or they died or moved away, when they stop paying, the company just sells their stuff. So I bid on a couple of boxes labeled Christmas decorations. Just a couple of cardboard boxes that look kind of old, and I didn't have a chance to look inside, but I figured it would be interesting, and if I didn't want to use them for decorations, then I can use them for craft projects. With Christmas decorations, I've always been about the glitter and the pretty, and so no matter what era they come from, there's always something good. Last year at St. Patrick's Church, the Deck the Halls craft fair, I got a couple of evergreen swags made with fresh greens and red berries, and they were beautifully set off by big aqua color ribbons. And I really loved the look of that aqua and red together. So this year I wanted to use that color combination. And so I opened the first box, which was surprisingly heavy, and imagine my delight when I found these vintage glass ornaments in all kinds of unlikely retro colors, like silver and aqua and pink and white. Something about them reminded me of those big Cadillacs from the 50s with their tail fins and their very exuberant design. All these white and chrome and pastel colors. But the fragile glass of these beautiful, intricate things was very far from the sturdy robustness of the impressive old vehicles. In fact, it was quite the opposite, and I wondered how they'd survived all this time. Of course, they've been carefully packed in their cartons and surrounded with tissue paper, but each cardboard box of ornaments with their cellophane tops were all intact, and each of them was filled with a full set of baubles, and I thought how someone had taken excellent care of them and put them carefully away each year. No cats twining up and down the tree and no projectiles flying through the air. This tree had probably been erected in the parlor in the days when trees were only erected on Christmas Eve and the children were in bed, so that they came downstairs in the morning to find the miraculous green branches festooned with bright and glittering orbs and still giving off the scent of the nearby forest they came from. Of course, I already had Christmas ornaments, but I really wanted to use these and to use the new color scheme. So all my old ornaments are in boxes packed away in the attic. Mixing the beautiful vintage ones with just a few current ones and the very pretty aqua ribbons, I was really pleased at how it turned out. So 3 days later, I had some friends over for our book club meeting. I was happy that this month's meeting fell at my house so I could show off my new decorations and try out some of the baking I'd done. It's always good to try out new recipes on your friends instead of your in-laws. So the first to arrive was Julia, who is something of an empath and a medium. And as expected, she really liked the new color scheme and the decorations. And as she was bent over, stroking one of the vintage silvery and aqua shapes with a cross-hatching, she shivered and said, "I'm feeling a present." "What kind of present?" I asked, and she explained that it was someone who had passed on but was unable to go to the other side, someone who was unsettled or angry or seeking justice. "Where did you get these ornaments?" I explained about the sale and how they came from the storage lockers that had been abandoned. Abandoned? Did people not want the things in them? Well, I guess not. Did they not want the things so they couldn't afford the storage fees anymore? Maybe it was a family heirloom and they couldn't pay the fees and all the items got taken. Or maybe someone swooped in after a death and took all the beautiful things from their elderly relatives, and then karma happened and they got sick and died, but the other relatives who had been left with no family mementos didn't even know where these items ended up. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the owner of these beautiful glass baubles wants them to go back to family. Maybe I was being told something. Maybe you'll never have any pleasure from these until they're restored to your rightful owners. Julia's a budding writer, as you can tell. Well, thank you, Julia. Way to go to spoil my fun. Listen, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't take them from anyone, and I paid my money. And if I didn't buy them, then someone else was going to buy them. At least I'm using them and appreciating them, and using them carefully too. If no one bought them, then they would have got thrown in the dump. So Julia wasn't one to quarrel, and people were arriving by this point, so we dropped the subject, and I turned to greet the other guests. However, that when the others oohed and awed over the glittery things and complimented me on the combination of vintage exuberance and modern classics, Julia said nothing. I have to say it did spoil some of the pleasure in my new treasures. But the subject quickly got onto the book we've been reading, and the discussion got a bit heated, and the decorations were forgotten. So we talked about, social justice and all the issues and that were near and dear to our hearts. And we opened a few bottles of wine, and I poured out my blackcurrant liqueur, and it was a lovely evening. So after everyone left and I picked up the glasses and tidied up a bit, I sat on the couch with the lights turned off in the room and only the tree lights glowing. Maybe it was there, like maybe it was Julia's words, but I could definitely feel something, a presence, but not in a bad way. It was a long week and I was tired, so I curled up on the couch with a fuzzy covering and the last glass of wine, and I started thinking about that presence that I could feel and wondering. And I imagined the owner of the box of ornaments. From the design and the color, I would have thought they came from the 40s. And I wondered about the person who had them and how many hands they had passed through and how they ended up in the storage locker. The handwriting on the cartons inside seemed like an older woman, or maybe like a woman who'd been taught that very proper Spencerian script. And I imagined her in the years after the war. Perhaps her husband had come home safe from the war and they were now married and expecting a child. Or perhaps there was a fiancé who had been killed in the war and she was now single and living on her own. These ornaments would have been expensive, and if she was a single woman living on her own, she would have had to save her money to afford them. Even small things like that were comparatively expensive and would have been carefully handled and put away safely to preserve them over many years. And I could imagine the woman who hung them every year and took them down and wrapped them in tissue and took them carefully away in the cartons and put them away in the attic. I felt like she must have been a secretary at an insurance company or something like that. And she grew up in the country and moved into town and got an apartment after she took her secretarial course. She was engaged during the war and her fiancé never came home, and she lived in her one-bedroom apartment and worked at the insurance company. But having grown up in the country, she had never got used to the idea of artificial trees, and so she always had a real tree, a small one, and hung these ornaments on them. I was trying to think what her name might have been. Maybe Euphemia. She worked at the insurance company until she retired, and then she moved to a nursing home. And when she did, she packed up her Christmas ornaments and gave them to her niece. And her niece didn't think much of them. That would have been in the 60s, I guess. And they were definitely not cool, so the niece never even unpacked them. I mean, what need of these delicate pastel glass when you could have bubbling lights and thick, fluffy ropes of red mylar? Anyway, now her niece is in the nursing home, and these went to the grandniece, but she put them in the storage locker. And she went traveling, and she's working on a cruise ship, and she spends Christmases in some tropical place making drinks for middle-aged couples and their indulged children. I wondered if anyone else in the family was upset that these ornaments went to someone who didn't even care or want them, and I bet there was another niece who would have treasured them. And I was very honored to have been lucky enough to score them, and that was about where I fell asleep. When I woke, my feet were cold. I had pins and needles in my hands from being pressed up under me, and I could feel a cold presence in the room. Actually, what woke me was almost like a cold hand on the back of my neck. In my sleepy state, I knew right away it was a ghost. "Euphemia?" I said. "Well," she said, "Euphemia Alexandra, but I was never called Euphemia, always Sandy." Did I conjure you up? Well, no, I was in the vicinity, but I felt like I had to come and clarify a few things. I imagined a whole life for you. Was any of that correct? Not much. Did your fiancé go overseas during the war? He did. And did you lose him? Well, I did lose him, but not in the way you imagined. He met a girl, a French girl. He got married and he stayed there. He wrote and told me. He apologized for ruining my life. I already realized while we were gone that we weren't well suited to each other and it would have been a big mistake. It all seemed romantic when he asked me to marry him, but in truth, we didn't know each other very well, and we weren't in love. We were, well, just romantic and caught up in it all. So that worked out for the best, at least for me. Did you stay at the insurance company all your life? Oh, Lord, no. That was excruciatingly boring. And the pay was buttons. No, I thought about what I wanted to do, which was to see other places, and what I was good at, which was math and logic and geometry. I kept saving money for a couple of more years, and then I went back to college. I became an engineer. That was really hard, not because of the courses, but because of the engineers. Nobody wanted a girl in the class. Really, I would never have gotten in, except for the confusion over my name. An easy mistake for them to make, the application coming from Sandy McMillan. I may have aided the confusion a little bit. I wasn't the top of my class, so I didn't get the hatred that would have caused, but I was about the fourth, so that commanded some respect. And after I graduated, no one would hire me. I finally got a job with a cousin of mine who had a contracting business. I think he took me out of pity and family loyalty, but I was good, and I know he was glad in the end. And once I had some experience with the PEng, that's the certification, I started to apply for jobs abroad. I worked in Peru and France and Norway and India. When I went to France, I got in touch with Robert. He was still living there with his family. We got together a few times, just old friends from a small village. I could tell he was a bit homesick. I could tell that he was glad he hadn't married me. He thought I was too uppity for a woman. I didn't like the way he bossed his wife around, so I realized what a lucky escape I had. So, you never married? You were alone all your life? Well, honey, it's true I never married, but I certainly wasn't alone. Oh, you mean you met someone? Who was he? What was his name? I never said he was a he, and it's really not your business. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just trying to imagine what your life was like. My life was great. I loved my work. I was good at it, and I got to travel all over. You know, in those days, arrangements were made by letter. No such thing as phone interviews. So when I arrived and they saw I was a woman, it was too late. And I was good at my job. Actually, I was excellent. Those courses I took for my secretary diploma, the bookkeeping and filing and shorthand, that all came very handy with my engineering work. So those beautiful glass ornaments, you hauled them all around from place to place? No. I used those the first 3 or 4 years, but when I went to my first job outside the country, I gave up my apartment and most of my things, and the rest I packed up and stored in my sister's attic, and I never unpacked them. So you mean the perfect condition and complete set wasn't because you took such good care of them, but because you forgot all about them? Well, I guess so, but I was very fond of those things because they were the first thing I bought when I moved from home to live in the city. I was working and saving up every penny to marry Robert when he came back from the war. Those ornaments were the only pretty things I had in that apartment. Then I ended up using the money I saved to go back to school. I spent most of my Christmases far from home, making music and eating good food. Well, there were a few things I had to try that were not very good, but you know how that is. So the ornaments stayed in the attic. I might have given them to my niece, but by that time they were sadly out of style. Not big enough or bright enough and all the wrong colors. So don't you worry, dear, about keeping them. I'm happy to see you using them. And if I may, I will leave you with 2 small pieces of advice. Stop procrastinating and just do your taxes. And then you use the refund to buy RSPs. And also, wear more sunscreen. And then she was gone. I sat for a few minutes and I absorbed all I had heard. Phew. And then there was another shadowy shape and a voice. So, I see you have my wooden decorations there all set up. I'm really glad you like them, but maybe we could talk about how the whole thing is set up. I'm Vincent A. I made those myself for my kids, and we use them every year. No offense to those glass ones, but they're kind of gaudy. I think my wooden ones are way much nicer and more sort of authentic. And they don't really work together with the shiny ones. You know, I made those for my kids. I had a girl and a boy. Well, we had a girl and a boy, but then my wife left, so I was on my own. Every year I made 2 figures, one for each of them. The figures would have like faces painted on them, people we knew. Every year, be a kind of thing we did on Christmas Eve. I'd bring out the new figures, and then we'd laugh and talk about whose face was on them. It was always a great evening. I felt really close to my kids. So by the end of it, from the time my wife left until I died, there must have been 40 of them. I thought my kids really liked them. They always made a big fuss when they showed up on Christmas morning. I don't understand what they were doing at that sale. I know they wouldn't have given them away. See, my wife left, and then I was the only one, so I made sure I did everything right. Good homemade meals, clean clothes, libraries and museums and all that go ahead, and all the home and school meetings. I guess I sort of wanted to show I was taking right good care of them. I mean, I think they did a good job. They turned out good. They went to college and got decent jobs, took care of me when I got sick. That's a hard thing for a young one. See that girl? See that Wendy? She has the face of my daughter's best friend, Wendy. See, they have the same name. We thought that was pretty funny. So she's supposed to be standing next to Peter Pan. And Peter Pan, he's got the face of my brother. He's what they call a confirmed bachelor. He never got married because they're in the story together. So you got them separated, and that's not how it's supposed to be. And the Tin Man there, he got the face of my son's industrial arts teacher. And he's supposed to be with the Cowardly Lion. The lion has the face of the principal. I guess that could have been awkward if the principal ever came to the house, but not much chance of that. And really, most people don't see themselves. Dorothy's there. That's my daughter, of course. Her name was Doris, and I changed up the look to make it look more like my daughter, and she really liked it. That was a good year. Yeah, so like I said, those figures all go together in certain ways, and you can't just switch them around because that's not how we did it every year. You have to set them up in the right way because that's an important part of Christmas. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to rearrange. I think you'll like it when I'm done. Aladdin is there. That's my son. He's a handsome young fella. And Jafar is that kid who's always partnered with him in science project and never did the share of the work. The Little Mermaid now. That was a really good one. See how the mermaid looks a lot like Dorothy, you know, because they're both my daughter, really. And Ursula the Sea Witch. Yeah, that's Mrs. Campbell at the store. She does the 4-H, and she failed my daughter in sewing. That's ridiculous. She kind of deserves to be Ursula for that. Anyway, so here's what I'm going to do just to help you out. I'm going to stick around for Christmas just to make sure that everything is in the places where they're supposed to be. And don't worry if you hear some like noises in the night because, you know, it'll be just the figures moving. But I promise I won't be creepy about it or scare anybody. Oh my, that was very strange. Well, after that, I certainly wasn't going to tell him that the painted wooden Disney figures were there for sort of kitsch and conversation rather than decorative value. But you have to give him credit. And then I heard another voice, a softer voice this time. Good evening, madam. I am Samil Al-Khoury, and I hope you will forgive my intrusion on your restful evening. I thought we could visit for a short time just to clarify a few things and to perhaps make a request, if I may be so bold. The ornately ornamented crucifix that you have erected on the sideboard was mine, or rather, it was mine until I gave it as a gift to my beloved. It is actually a very old and valued piece owned by my family in Lebanon. And you may wonder why an Arab from Lebanon has a crucifix as a family heirloom. But where I come from, there were at the time, many instances of what you would call mixed marriages. So this crucifix, which is made of gold and ivory, was passed down through 7 generations of my family. As the oldest son, I inherited it. When I met the young woman who I later fell in love with, I was taken with her fine mind and strong character. Her beauty was of the inward kind that shone from within and gave her a kind of grace that made me love her more than I ever expected to love anyone. Her name was Mary Sarah. And when I first began to woo her, her parents were concerned, not from prejudice against my race, but perhaps because of fear of the unknown and concerned that I might take her away from them. But she was persuasive and persistent, and they came to support our betrothal. In the months before our engagement, we had many discussions and made many plans for our future life together. My beloved believed that most troubles could be avoided by discussions and consensus. So, for example, in the question of religion, we had decided to adopt the Irish model, that which was devised by the common people of that country before the modern troubles brought violence upon them. That is, that the male children would adopt my religion of Islam and be followers of Muhammad, and the female children would adopt her Catholic religion and be followers of Christ. A pragmatic and effective approach to the problem, and one I feel would have worked admirably for us, as we were both reasonable and adaptable people. This was my betrothal gift to her, a way to cement our agreement, you might say. But then the war came and all the world was disrupted, and my work and family obligations made it necessary to return to my country, and communication was difficult, and travel was impossible. In this time, my beloved and her father both died, and her mother was obliged to sell the crucifix to provide for the younger children. Unfortunately, she was a poor and naive woman, and the buyer was the same. The piece was sold for a fraction of its value, and sadly, it was not cared for or appreciated. When I managed to return, I had lost touch with the remaining members of her family, and when I tracked them down, they were in dire straits. I helped them as best I could, but the crucifix was gone and untraceable. My request, madam, is that the crucifix be returned to its owner, who is buried in Sacred Heart Cemetery. She was a devout woman, and she would be much gratified to know that this old and venerable piece will be with her. There was no one in my immediate family left, and it was given to her as a gift. So I think that is the most fitting place for the crucifix. I would ask you to take it there and bury it in the earth that covers her grave. I'd ask you to bury it deep to make sure that it meets with no harm. Wait, you mean this crucifix is a valuable artifact made by artisans from gold and ivory, and then you can provide the provenance of it going back 7 generations in Lebanon, and you want me to bury it in the earth? I don't think I can do that. I'm a museum curator. It's my job to preserve artifacts and to present them in a way that teaches people the history of places and cultures. This is a perfect example of an artifact that tells deep and important stories. This is a highly significant item. But, madam, this item does not belong to you. This item belongs to the woman to whom I was betrothed, and a small measure to myself as her soon-to-be husband. It is important that it lie with my betrothed, so that she knows I would not forget her, and then that I remained true to her my whole life. But think of the people who would love to hear the story and how much can be learned from it, and think of how the memory of your fiancé would be preserved in the minds of many, many people. The tragic love story between you is worthy of telling. It could be a novel or a movie. Saoirse Ronan could play Mary Sarah, and Rami Malek, he could play you. The opinion of strangers was never a consequence to my darling. She would have preferred to be remembered for her writings and her accomplishments rather than her tragic love story and her early death. And she would certainly not have liked the story of her family's poverty and sorrows to be commented on, and the decisions of her honorable mother to be judged by strangers. And I myself have my own accomplishments to imprint my memory upon the world. No, the thing must be returned to the earth. Please, maybe there's another solution, another way to look at this. Madam, the crucifix cannot be in two places at once. I see no compromise in this matter. I ask you to return it to its owner. I call upon you, as a matter of honor, to respect my request. He bowed his head and disappeared. So now what am I supposed to do? I wake up and my head is aching from the wine. I should have remembered that homemade wine that Courtney brings every time. That should be poured on the plants instead of drunk. Except it would probably kill the plants, because it's certainly killing me. And I have a crick on my neck from sleeping on the couch, and I swear I had the weirdest dreams. Do you think it's possible that those decorations really were possessed and that I was really visited by ghosts? The wooden ornaments have been rearranged. That's not how I had them. So, is it possible that this crucifix that I set up on the sideboard is actually not brass and bakelite? Surely that can't be true. My mother used to tease me and say I should have been born in another time and place because of my attraction to filigree designs and ornate metalwork. But when I examine it closely, the metalwork is very fine and intricate and definitely not poured from a mold, but wrought by a goldsmith. I feel pretty stupid. I should definitely have picked up on that if I'd been paying attention. So now what am I supposed to do? I could take it to have it appraised, but then I'd be obligated to do something about it. But what would I do to honor his wishes? Going to bring the crucifix towards research its provenance, which would be fairly easy to trace now that I know so much. This could actually be a really huge deal. If I brought this forward and said that I traced its path and unearthed it from obscurity, that I had researched a piece of oral history and documented it and linked it to an important, significant piece of art tying two cultures together, with that on my resume, I could apply to any of the big museums. I'd have a good shot at any job I applied to. And I could pay off my student loan and get a place of my own. Holy shit, I think I just struck the jackpot. So I opened my laptop and Googled furiously for a few minutes. It doesn't take long before I found a description of the lost artifact, one that matches the piece. I really can't say my piece because I can't actually believe that this thing is in my apartment, let alone that it could be mine. We have a UV light at work. I can check it to make sure that it really is ivory, but I'm sure that that's the piece. Everything matches, right down to its disappearance during the war. Wait a second, but I should really do as he asked, put it in the grave. But this is too important an artifact to let it degrade in the ground. The wet, acidic soil here will destroy it. Think of that antique ivory with those carvings just disintegrating in the ground. And then, without the structure of the ivory behind, the weight of the earth and stones would crush the gold filigree. No, I can't do it. I can't throw it away. I know it doesn't belong to me. I know it belongs to everybody. Well, it belonged to Samin. Well, it belongs to his fiancée. Did I actually promise them that I would bury it? I can't quite remember. If I didn't bury it, would he come back? Would he pursue me for it and punish me? Would this be considered stealing? Oh, God, I don't know what to do.